Good morning, and welcome to the virtual worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House of Provincetown, where we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person and where we support each other in our spiritual search for truth and meaning. My name is Reverend Kate Wilkinson, and I'm so glad that you have joined us this week. Our service today is called Suffragette Sunday because we are celebrating 100 years of a woman's right to vote. This service is also part of You the Vote, which is a national effort to get out the vote and to defend our democracy. I know that we are feeling so many things leading up to this election. We are in a time of anxious waiting, but also a time of deep commitment, action, and resolve that I hope we can continue well after November 3rd. So in this spirit, I am going to light our chalice here in the meeting house, and I invite you to light a candle wherever you are. In this way, we can feel connected even while we are apart.
I light the chalice with the words from our covenant. Love is the spirit of this meeting house. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another.
Hi, I'm Nicole Presley, National Organizer of You the Vote, and I'm so honored to be a part of You the Vote and a part of this special worship service. By this time, you've probably gotten used to virtual worship. You've made sure your computer is charged, you've searched your email for Zoom links, or you've scrolled through your social media feed for the live stream. But from whatever platform you're entering worship today, you are in sacred space. Getting here was not easy. Remember the spring? Remember, many of us had to learn new skills and to stretch ourselves and maybe our internet speed to continue to gather with our beloved faith community. We learned Zoom, we downloaded apps, and we reached out for help to be with one another. Transformation is always a stretch, and we need to bring that same energy to this year's election. In the past few months, I have witnessed amazing things from all of you. We created a goal to reach out to 1 million voters, and we are almost there. We stretched ourselves. We stretched ourselves to get on another Zoom call, to learn to text voters, phone bank, and send postcards. We learned how to be vulnerable and have critical conversations with members of our communities. We are not just a faith community that believes another world is possible, but we are a community that is willing to act to make that world a reality. We have a legacy of showing up, and we know that our victories are never guaranteed, and we know that those victories are never won by those in power ceding it willingly. The people imagined it, the people demanded it, and we, the people, gathered to make it so. In all of our movements, the stakes were high. But instead of mobilizing out of the fear of defeat, we have organized out of a sacred calling to build a world that we know is possible. That is why nonpartisan work is not just important, but is absolutely revolutionary. We come together to learn, to create, and to put into practice ways of being towards our collective liberation. That is our victory. And as the chant goes, I believe that we will win. I believe that together, through sacred and sustained work, now and beyond November, we can call forth a world that moves towards our collective liberation. But we must all show up to vote love in 2020. That means showing up to the work that is needed, not just the work that is comfortable. That means showing up in service and in solidarity to combat a simple campaign of voter suppression and intimidation. That means recognizing that white supremacy and capitalism are the technologies through which political agency and democracy are stripped from marginalized communities. So when I say vote love, I don't just mean voting our values, although I absolutely want you to do that if you are able. I don't just mean showing up to voter contact work, even though I absolutely want everyone to join into this work. I mean centering the oppressed, working to free them all, to defend Black lives, to fight for climate justice and healthcare for all, for reproductive justice, and for safe and thriving schools and communities. I mean continuing whatever work is necessary to make sure every ballot is counted and that the results and will of the people are respected. We have important choices to make in 2020, but if we are to really vote love and defeat hate in 2020, we must also commit to continue to side with love every single day after November 3rd and into 2021. If you are in it for the long haul, if you believe that another world is possible because you are gathered in a community that puts faith into action, if you are ready to stretch beyond November 3rd to protect democracy, join us. Take the Vote Love Pledge to join a team that is organizing to take action in this election and ready to mobilize after November 3rd for the work ahead. Join me. Take your phone out, text Pledge Love to 51555 to take the pledge today, or go online at uuthevote.org. We need everyone in this work. Thank you for finding your role in this work. Thank you for doing it with joy and hopefulness. And thank you for joining UU the Vote. Let's make sure love always wins.
All right, everyone. So gather together because we are going to talk about somebody amazing. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was born and raised into a free Black family in 1825. Her family lived in Maryland, where slavery was still legal. Being born free in a land where people who looked like you were enslaved was something that inspired both Frances and her family to become abolitionists.
When she was very young, both of her parents died, and she went to live with her aunt and uncle. Theirs was an abolitionist household. They worked to end slavery, and they also ran a school where black children, including Frances, received an education.
While still a young teen, she went to work as a housekeeper and seamstress in the household of a Baltimore bookstore owner. Her employers encouraged the inquisitive Frances to use their big library. She devoured books and began to write poetry and essays which appeared in the newspaper. By the time she was 20 years old, her writings were published in her first book, Forest Leaves.
In 1850, Congress passed a law that allowed slave catchers to kidnap, enslave, and sell free Black people in states where slavery was legal. Her aunt and uncle fled from Maryland to Canada. Frances fled to Ohio, which did not allow slavery, and then 2 years later to Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, she became involved in the Underground Railroad, a movement that helped people escaping from slavery. Throughout this all, Frances continued to write and to publish books of poetry, much of it against slavery.
In time, Frances became the first black woman to earn a living through the use of her words, living modestly and donating much of her income to helping her uncle's work with the Underground Railroad. In 1854, the Maine Anti-Slavery Society hired her to travel all over the Northeast to make anti-slavery speeches. She became one of the most famous speakers and authors of her time.
All kinds of people came to hear her speak, but she made a point of not charging Black people admission. Frances was progressive throughout her life. While she wrote and spoke against slavery, she also took other kinds of actions. She refused to wear or eat goods that were farmed by enslaved workers, including cotton and sugar. She wouldn't wear clothes made of cotton or eat food that contained sugar.
In 1860, the year that the Civil War began, Frances Watkins married Fenton Harper, who already had 3 children. The two had a daughter together, and Frances took time off from her writing and speaking to tend to her blended family. Unfortunately, just a few short years later, her husband died, leaving her as a young widow responsible for many unpaid bills. Frances Watkins Harper made the difficult decision to send her children to live with relatives and go back on speaking tours in order to make money and provide for her family.
By then, slavery had ended, and she spoke for women's rights and for legal and civil rights for black people. She wrote poems and essays about the experiences of new freed slaves struggling to make their way despite the damage done to black people by slavery. In 1870, she joined the Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. There, she found a community where white and black people came together and where many shared her passion for justice.
In many ways, Frances Harper was at home in 2 different worlds. Although she was used to working with white people, she also kept her connection to the Black community in Philadelphia. She maintained her membership in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, where she taught Sunday school. She wrote 3 novels specifically for Black people, highlighting family connections and choices about racial identity. She pushed for education and voting rights for Black people, and she encouraged Black children to learn and grow, just as she had been encouraged as a child.
During her long life, as you have heard, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper offered her voice, her words, her money, her labor, and most importantly, her love to the work of justice making for her people. She used her voice and her privilege as an educated free Black woman to raise awareness of the plight of Black people in the United States after the Civil War. We honor her memory and her place among our Unitarian Universalist ancestors.
I remember so clearly how I was feeling at this time 4 years ago. I was hopeful and excited to vote for the first female president of the United States of America. On voting day, I dressed all in white and went to the polls with a suffragette sash I had made out of ribbon that said, "Votes for Women." At the polling station, they made me take it off. But here is a picture of me in the excitement of that day. I also remember that on that day, November 8th, 2016, women in Rochester, New York, left their polling stations with similar levels of excitement and hope. And instead of going home, they went to put their stickers on Susan B. Anthony's grave. You see, when Susan B. Anthony cast her ballot in the 1872 presidential election, she was not given an "I voted" sticker. Instead, she was given a pair of handcuffs and was arrested for voting when women did not yet have the right to vote. Susan B. Anthony did not live to see the 19th Amendment adopted exactly 100 years ago in 1920. She and other brave women like her were the ones who helped to get us there. As a woman, I feel such deep gratitude for all these suffragists who risked everything and worked tirelessly for the right to vote, even though they didn't all live to gain that right themselves. I get so upset whenever I hear someone say that they didn't vote. When I remember the history of these suffragettes, these women were hardcore. They organized effectively and tirelessly. They marched and picketed. They were beaten and arrested and imprisoned. They went on hunger strikes and were forcibly fed. And still, they did not give up. There was one suffragette in England, Emily Wilding Davison, who died for the cause after throwing herself in front of King George's horse at the 1913 Derby. And here in the US, Inez Milholland died of anemia and exhaustion created by her brutal schedule of marches and speeches and travel dedicated to the cause of gaining women the vote. I remember learning about these women in school as a little girl. I learned about Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. You know who I didn't learn about? Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. There were many Black suffrage women leaders that I didn't learn about. Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, Nannie Helen Burroughs, Mary Ann Shadd Cary. I remember being surprised 4 years ago when I started seeing posts by Black women about how they were not going to be making a pilgrimage to Susan B. Anthony's grave on Election Day, and how there has been, in fact, deep resentment about these white suffragists in the African American community for over 100 years. I didn't learn this in school. I had to educate myself. You see, before the Civil War, white women and black men and women were somewhat united in their efforts to expand voting rights. The causes of abolition and suffrage were very much aligned, with many people working for both causes. Frederick Douglass was a great proponent of women's right to vote. He even spoke at the now famous 1848 Seneca Falls Convention. But you know what? People in power, white men in power, were nervous about this potential takeover by the masses of people who, up until now, had had no voice in government or politics. To keep their power, they needed to divide white women and blacks. They put forward the 15th Amendment, which would grant African American men the right to vote, but not women. The women were upset. They felt left behind. But even worse, it uncovered a deep racism within the suffrage movement. White women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton began working against the amendment and spreading racist ideas. When it passed in 1869, the divisions between the two groups deepened. In 1895, Susan B. Anthony told her longtime ally Frederick Douglass not to attend the Atlanta Convention for the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She said she was afraid it would dissuade white Georgians from the movement. White suffragettes disinvited their black sisters from marching with them, even though they had been working side by side all this time. And just like that, a strong coalition between white women and African Americans was fractured, and mistrust between the two groups grew, and white men remained in power. It was easier for them then to deny black men their right to vote with things like poll taxes and literacy tests and threats of violence. And of course, it would be another 50 years before women were granted the right to vote by the 19th Amendment. And black men and black women would be disenfranchised over and over again until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Actually, they are still being disenfranchised by gerrymandering and the removal of polling places and barriers to voting, like requiring you to show your driver's license, which disproportionately shuts out voters of color from the polls. Of course, this is how the same wealthy white people and corporations stay in power year after year. They convince whites that they are better than blacks. They convince women that they deserve the vote before black men, and black men that votes for women can wait. They convince gay people that trans rights are not something that the community needs to get involved in. And they convince poor Americans that immigrants are taking their jobs. They take all of the cookies and watch us fight over the crumbs and hope that we are so distracted by the fight that we don't even realize that there are way more of us than of them. And if we all joined together, they could never take the darn cookies away in the first place. I am frustrated that the history I learned in school was not a complete history. But even more than that, I am nervous that the lessons we've learned since then will be forgotten. I fear deeply another 4 years of Trump. But I also fear that should Biden win, we might slip into the familiar trap of forgetting who our coalitions and partners are. that we might go back to fighting for our small crumbs instead of distributing the cookies equally and fairly, remembering that there is enough for everyone if we only stop hoarding our power. I'm still proud of the suffragettes. I'm still enormously grateful for them and claim them as part of my heritage as a woman in this country. But it's no longer an ignorant and wholesale pride based on half the facts. My eyes are open now, and I see that they created great good and also perpetrated great harm. And I know that I, too, am capable of both. In our faith tradition, we strive to tell the whole stories, not just the feel-good stories, to remind us of this, so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, so that we build on the good and work to do better than our forebears when it comes to relationality, solidarity, and interconnectedness. Unitarian Universalists all across the country are being called to UU the vote and to vote with love. When we learn our history, when we educate ourselves, when we stop being so protective and defensive of ourselves, we know better what that love means, what that love looks like, and what that love asks of us. I am going into this election week a little less enthusiastically than 4 years ago. The sexism and racism in this country run deeper than I knew before, and I am more aware now. My history has fewer holes in it, and I see more than I used to because I view the world through more lenses now, and my eyes are open wider. So I am less naive than 4 years ago, but not less hopeful. And my hope is one that has deepened and broadened because of coalitions and partnerships that have taught me over the last 4 years who I am connected to. And so I know even more fully now that I do not go to the polls alone. This is the hope that I will be voting with. When this world learns to live as one, oh, better times will come. May it be so. Amen. And blessed be.